Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 20th of June 2025. Banner week for some family in Ireland who won the EuroMillions. We'll come to that in a second. Bad week for the Puska family in court. Bad week for people concerned about the grooming gangs in the UK, with a report being released confirming the worst fears of many people there. A bad week for people who fly the Irish flag in their houses. Bad week to be Iran. Good week to be Paul Reid, former HSE chair who's got a new job. But I will start by saying hello to Sarah and saying, how are you? And please tell me you did not win the EuroMillions.
I was going to say if I'd won the EuroMillions, would I be here? But I think I still would, for God and country and all that. So no, unfortunately not. Was it 250 million?
250 million. It's one of those ones where I don't know if I'm speaking for many people in the country, so I'll just be honest about my own character flaws, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am very happy for the person that won it, person or persons. And I also really hope that I don't know them. Because it's one of those ones where
explain that.
like, well,
explain that.
Yeah, I think it'd be very hard if it was like somebody who was like a close friend or something, not like if you won the 250 million, I'd be like, that's brilliant, Sarah. And I'd be like,
but if I won the 250 million, I'd probably give you a few quid.
I know. I would do the same for you, yes. Yeah, that's true. But that would probably be just cheap. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
No, I understand. Like, I wouldn't like somebody I hate to win it, put it that way.
Yeah, that's fair. I think everyone understands that instinct. But whoever it is, our piece in this during the week, you now have the freedom to live your life however you want. That's the reason we play the lottery, isn't it? The dream of just being able to not worry about money for the end of time. So go and blow it in Las Vegas or spend it on good causes, whatever you want. I mean, good luck to you. You won it, and it's everybody's dream come
subscribe to Gript.
Oh yeah, that's you're a Gript subscriber. You know where to send them. All right, I want to start this week though with a story I didn't mention because it's really, really interesting, or I find it really interesting in terms of talking about how the state does business. It was announced this week, Sarah, that the government's basic income scheme for artists, which is basically a scheme for those of you who do not know this. A couple of years ago, Catherine Martin, when she was Minister for the Arts, the Green Minister, she basically said, poor artists are struggling. I'm going to roll out a scheme that gives a whole bunch of them free money every week to help them be more productive. And so a bunch of artists applied, and a large number of them were drawn at lottery. And these people who live and walk amongst us now all receive 325 quid a week in cash from the taxpayer every week, just for being artists. Independent, I should stress, of anything they do. Don't actually have to produce anything in return for this money. It's just a basic income. So they get it regardless, just for being artists. And the current government, which no longer includes the Greens, announced this week that this pilot scheme, it was a pilot scheme, it wasn't intended to last forever, will be extended for 6 months while they try and figure out whether to make it permanent. But I just wanted to quote something from you to you, if you didn't mind, because this came out this evening from the Irish Times. It says, a report being prepared by the Department of Culture examines the first 2 years of the scheme, while an independent research report has already been published. A cost-benefit analysis is also being undertaken. In a statement, the department said the research phase is ongoing, but it is clear from the evidence collated to date that the payment is having a consistent and positive effect across almost all indicators. It said artists are able to devote more time to their work, produce more pieces, experience a boost to their well-being, feel less anxious, and feel protected from the precariousness of incomes in the sector. So what I want to talk to you about is the fact that the Irish government has commissioned a report, presumably at some expense to the taxpayer, which has come to the radical conclusion that when you give people free money, they're happier.
They like it.
And they're less worried about money.
I know.
Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a monologue. What do you think about this whole basic income thing for the artists?
Well, I mean, look, I don't want to come across as a sort of a uncultured sort of whatever the word might be. But I think it's garbage. Yeah, Philistine. I think it's garbage. I also think that like many other things, the government or the Arts Council interpretation of what art is, I'm almost 100% positive, varies wildly from what I think art is. And you and I have had conversations offline in the past, getting absolutely hysterical at some of the garbage that has been produced under the term art in the last few years, and art installations and live art and somebody standing on just garbage. And it's completely absurd. And I again, I hate to fall into the trap because I think there's too much of it of you shouldn't be spending money on X because there's Y. But I think this is a stretch too far. I mean, like I remember there was a report on RT a few years ago. Do you remember this about a woman complaining about how her art, that she wasn't getting enough, making enough money from her art, and or it was about her electricity bill or something. And she just had all these paintings, but she wasn't selling any of them. And I'm sorry, but like at the end of the day, it's not really up to the state or me as a taxpayer to fund your hobby. Like what?
Yep.
I mean, is somebody sitting in a room somewhere and painting loads of paintings and being anxious about being able to pay their bills, and then the state giving them money, and then they feel less anxious because now their bills are paid by us while they continue to paint things that nobody's buying. No, honey. I mean, like you can't kind of art your way out of living a real adult life. And that's the way I see this. I mean, also, there is the Art Council, and there are so many schemes, and there's so much money already pumped into providing some kind of a net for these kind of people. There's programs, there's amazing things that the Art Council do for writers and things. They can go to retreats and learn, blah, 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 blah. Money is put out hand over fist by the Art Council, by the state for artists. And this is just another thing. And I'm like, well, it just gets to a point where you're like, I think you should maybe get a job.
Is there still the income tax thing, isn't there? Or did they get rid of that? I
Yeah,
don't think they got rid of
exactly.
that. I think if you're an artist, you don't
No.
have to pay any income tax on your earnings from art as well, so you're tax free. Look, I mean, I do have, I'm a bit of a philistine, but I do have some sympathy for artists in this respect. I mean, it is true, for example, that Pride and Prejudice, which is the novel written by Jane Austen, which has been adapted any number of times and is sort of one of the classics of British literature, never
Mm,
made any money for Austen in her own lifetime. It was only kind
yeah.
of rediscovered after she died. And so with art, there is that kind of, there's always the chance. I mean, it's just like when you go and buy your EuroMillions ticket, you can hang on to the dream that you're going to win the thing, right? And somebody in Cork came true. I think there's roughly the same odds out there for kind of struggling artists who kind of believe that at some stage after their death, their work will be picked up and it'll be, oh my God, we never knew we had a genius living amongst us, and he died a life of penury, like many artists do. But at the same time, I don't buy it. I'm sorry. I mean, why can't anybody who is on the dole, which essentially is what the basic income is, just go down to the social welfare office and go, well, I know I've been on the dole here for 20 years and I'm getting my 250 quid a week or whatever it is, but I've actually now decided I'm going to be an artist. Can I have the basic income of 350 quid instead and get an extra 100 quid a week? I mean, why not? The whole point of a basic income is to give people security. And I know there's this economic theory out there, and it was popular, it was in vogue for a while on sort of the kind of intellectual right in the early noughties and sorry, early 2010s during the economic crisis, that a basic income is something we should look at for everybody, where the state just gives everybody $1,000 a month basically,
Yeah.
and says you get that out of the state's coffers, whatever, and then you pay tax in on top of it. It's an interesting idea, but you can't call it a basic income when it's just going to some people. It's just the dole for artists. Like, but no one wants to call it the dole because, if you're an artist in South Dublin and people are going, well, how are you surviving? They don't want to say I'm on the dole. They want to say, well, I'm on the basic income for artists scheme. Sounds so much grander, doesn't it?
But it also goes the other way too, John, in that I know people who are, again, like what is art? But I know people who have, set up let's call it a side business, a side hustle in cake making, in dog related stuff, in trying to be an online content creator, whatever. And they work until their job makes them, the side hustle makes them enough money to leave their job. So supposing you work in a call center, but you also are an artist or a photographer, then you work in the call center until eventually you start getting, let's say, wedding photography. Then you start getting gigs and you build that up and build that up. And then at a certain point, you can make the business case to leave your job because you are now a full-time photographer. That's what people do. They don't go, I'm not going to work and then I'm just going to wait until my business takes off. Sure, like that's not the way the world works. That's not applicable to anybody else who's trying to do. And again, to go back to my point, government or whoever is in charge of this, I guarantee you that their interpretation of what art is quite vastly different. It's like your example, fine, but you're talking about like great literature. You're not talking about somebody who's making art installations out of their menstrual blood, which I'm pretty sure was an actual thing at one point.
The other thing here that strikes me is to move.
Sorry, did I make that? Did I make that up, or have we had a conversation about that in the past?
Oh no, definitely. I don't know if it was in Ireland now, but there's definitely been various things done with menstrual blood and urine and all other sorts of bodily excretions.
And it was called art. Yeah.
Yes, it was called art. It was called art. Some of it even appeared in galleries. My favorite one was just the banana taped to a wall, and then somebody paid a lot of money for it and ate the banana. I think that actually happened. To me, it's interesting. This is happening in the week of the National Economic Forum, because on Monday of this week, the government gathered all its stakeholder groups in Dublin Castle to basically set out the budgetary position for the year and the plan. And of course, by all the interested parties, I mean all the taxpayer-funded NGOs and all the trade unions and maybe one or two business organisations. But this was a gathering of the great and the good. And I think it's connected because I'm just astonished at the sheer power that the arts have in Ireland, in a society where I think if you talk to most people on the street with this basic income for the artist thing, they'd say you're bloody mad. Yet it happens anyway. Why does it happen anyway? Because we've got this basic permanent groups lobbying the state for all kinds of harebrained schemes like this. And I was just looking at the announcements that came out this week that basically we're not going to get any income tax cuts this budget. All those one-off supports that you got over the last couple of years for your electricity bill, they're not coming again. So basically, the budgetary policy of the state is that most taxpayers will be poorer next year than they were this year. And by the way, we're going to increase spending across the board. So nobody in any of the NGOs or trade unions or taxpayer-funded organisations that litter the state will be worse off at all. And I just sat there and kind of went, this is an allegory for how this state is run. It is run for the benefit of a select few. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, because I don't think that's a conspiracy theory. It's just a fact. The state is run for the benefit of a particular class. And if you're an artiste, you're in that class and you get a little slice of the cake.
For doing nothing.
No. Anyway, we move on because were we talking about news talk or were we talking about the Puska case first? You pick.
News talk.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people were angry about this week. Do you fly the Tricolor outside your house up there in Malahide? Or would you not want people thinking you were a racist?
I don't fly the Tricolor outside my house, but but lots of people do in Ireland, and I see them sometimes. And I think that the fact that somebody can confidently and with such confidence go on national radio and accuse anybody who's flying the Tricolor outside their house of being potentially a racist shows how far gone we are in terms of the media's attitude to people who have any ounce of nationalism in them, or who are opposed to government policy in a couple of key areas. I think it's a disgraceful thing to say.
It's funny. It reminded me, we're literally 10 years behind the UK on this stuff. About 10 years ago, anyone who's listening to this podcast, some of you if you're interested in British politics, you might remember it. Emily Thornberry, who was then the deputy leader of the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. Maybe it wasn't 10 years ago. It was around 2017. So some would say 8 years ago. She was out on the campaign trail and she went off to somewhere outside the M25, somewhere people from Islington in London don't really venture. Let's say it was Burnley. It wasn't Burnley, but let's say it was Burnley up north. And she encountered a white van parked outside a house with a St. George's flag flying from it. And I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was basically, yes, this is the kind of place where, you see the St. George's flag flying and you're in a bit of trouble. And it was essentially the same thing. It was this is in England, the St. George's flag is a flag of big beer-bellied, soccer-loving, darky-hating. And by the way, I'm saying, I'm using that as a parody phrase. I'm not using the word. I'm saying that's how they're parodied. Darky-hating, football hooligans, basically, and that flag is associated with nothing but negativity. And I got the exact same vibe from News Talk this week. It was like this exact same thing was happening 10 years on. And I think that's true of a lot of things that happened in Britain 10 years ago that we're kind of living through echoes of them now.
But then also what I think is that it's not really a kind of a difference of political opinions. It's a class thing.
Yeah, it is. But it was in the UK too. I mean, this is Emily Thornby. Sorry, maybe I didn't explain it well. Very wealthy, very well-to-do, very posh lawyer, very liberal, very left-wing, very better than you. Traveling up to Burnley to talk to the kind of people who eat pork pies at the football at the weekend and deciding she was better than them. It was a class thing there. It's a class thing here too.
Yeah, and if you're working in news talk or whatever, the chances are you don't really know a lot of people who fly flags outside their house, tricolors outside their houses. You don't hang out with them, you don't know them, and it's easy for you to kind of comment on them because you ultimately think that they're less than you.
Why don't you fly the tricolor outside your house?
It just never occurred to me.
It's interesting. I don't either. Don't fly it. Would never occur to me to fly it. I kind of figure people know what country they're in
to now.
by the time to get. You'd be tempted to now, would you?
Yeah, because if that's what, I mean, frankly, some people think, they can kind of sneer about the tricolor and think, oh, like clutch their pearls and talk about make those kind of assumptions about the people who live in those houses. I'd almost be tempted to do it to annoy those people. But I don't think we should get into kind of politicizing the flag like that. I think the flag belongs to all of us. I think it always has. And I think if somebody feels a certain type of pride by putting the flag outside their house, I don't think anybody should be thinking, or never mind going on radio and making these kind of comments about them. But like, again, it's just that kind of like class snobbery, moral superiority that's absolutely rampant in our media classes. That's what this is.
I'll say two things. One of them will get me in trouble. The other one hopefully won't. The one that'll get me in trouble is I don't like the flag. I mean, it's not that I wouldn't. I think we should get rid of it or anything. It's just not my taste. I've always thought the presidential flag, the blue one with the gold harp, is the much nicer Irish flag. But I can't fly that because I'm not the president, right? The second reason is that I genuinely don't like the politicization of the flag by anyone.
Yeah.
And this is not, I'm not agreeing with News Talk, but I remember for years, like, and you'll remember this, going to election counts back in the day, and
Sinn Féin,
Sinn Féin would you'd think they owned the flag, and also
100%.
somebody who grew up in proximity to Northern Ireland during the worst. I didn't grow up during the worst of it, but towards the tail end of it, where it was still pretty bad. For me, the way that flag, and I think this is one of the problems, we talk about needing a new flag for Irish unity, the way that flag was associated in the minds of the victims of the IRA with the acts committed by the IRA, I think was deeply, deeply, deeply unfortunate. And for that reason, I'm not ashamed to be Irish, and I'm perfectly happy to march under that flag and see it fly atop our government buildings, but it wouldn't occur to me personally to fly it outside my home. But I thought the attitude from News Talk, as you say, was just it wasn't just News Talk, of course. News Talk's a fine station with many good presenters, and I'm quite regularly on it. And I don't want to pretend that that's an institutional thing. But I thought this was a real error of judgment. Real error of judgment. People like their flag, and most people who fly it do it to say, I'm Irish and I'm proud of this flag, and I'm proud. I want to do the best by the country. That's what you're saying. I want to do the best by the country.
Yeah. No? And I feel a certain way about being Irish and Irishness. Good for them. Fly it high. That's what I say.
Still think we should adopt the presidential standard as the flag. Just a much nicer flag. It really is. It's an ancient Irish symbol. Blue was the old colour of Hibernia. It's a good flag. And also,
don't be ridiculous. The tricolour is the Irish flag. The tricolour is our flag. Don't be silly now.
What colour is it, the tricolour?
Green, white, and orange.
Okay, that's good, because I always grew up in a place where people always said the colours of the tricolour were green, white, and gold.
Oh,
which of course they're not. Oh yeah,
God,
yeah, that was often
green,
said.
white, and gold. I've never even heard that.
Yeah, no, that was often said in Monaghan when I was growing up. Green, white, and gold. And it was always like, no, it's not gold. It's not gold. It's orange. And
it's
it
orange.
is about orange. Yes. And it is about reconciling two traditions on the island. But I actually think the best way to reconcile them would be just to have an agreed flag that we all agreed on. But look, this is a debate for another day, and I can feel the angry comments piling up
it's also,
underneath the video.
It's also a separate issue. It's also a separate issue. Flags are symbolic. Flags are symbolic. They're part of your culture. They have meaning, for people. And this conversation and this whole issue is about making an assumption about frankly, the character and the person who is flying a flag outside their house. And to do that is, I think, quite offensive.
Yeah, I agree. I just didn't think it was anyone's best moment, and it's just it also by the way sets you up as somebody who doesn't like your own flag. I mean, I just said
Yeah,
I
I
didn't
know.
like the flag, but I mean I mean the coloring. I don't mean what it stands for. I like the country.
You're just being
Um,
difficult. You're not disagreeing with the principle. You know what I mean?
I'm just
You're
being
just being
contrarian. I am.
you're just
I
being
am. Anyway,
contrarian.
the angry comments onto the video for me saying that will be legion, and so I apologize to you. But I always try to tell you the truth. I like the flag, like being Irish, I like the country, like being Irish. Not a huge fan of the flag, just from an aesthetic point of view. Let's move on. Let's move on and talk about the Puska case, because that was a big development this week, and there was a lot of commentary. I saw online, and certainly I heard a lot of it offline as well, about there were up to 20 people living in that house. Sarah, what did you make of it?
I saw newspaper articles that described the lifestyle of the people who lived in that house leading up to the horrific murder that occurred by somebody who lived in that house, and I just found it really depressing. I'm not surprised that people got really angry with the description of a wonderful life where people got up at 12:30 in the day, drank coffee and chatted and talked to each other, and sometimes went out and went into the town, and everything's wonderful. And I just think that for people, we've had a couple of conversations in the last few weeks, and people get upset in the comments and they argue, with different things that we talk about. But I think that most people would agree that ultimately there are people in Ireland who are working, whether they be on middle income or low income or whatever. But there are people in Ireland right now who are working their arses off to raise kids and, get to work and pay their bills and struggle with a cost of living that's out of control, I think, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to read about a group of people who just live in a house that they were given, who don't work, who sit around drinking coffee, and the day of the murder was like any other day, and that this person got up out of bed at 12:30. I just think that's very aggravating for people, and I don't blame them.
Or that
Like, I'm
he
not
went to
even
look
not
for
even
his,
like
he
not even
went
to
to look
get
for his
into
brother. He went to look for his brother in the casino where he thought he'd be. That one stuck with me.
not like just leaving aside everything else that happened. I just think that it makes people feel, and rightly so, like mugs. And a lot of people that I know, friends of mine, and I've been quite struck by some of them. I was literally just talking to Keith a while ago, naming somebody that we're friendly with who would be quite a liberal, I would say, a self-identified liberal. And he was sending me enraged text about this situation where, this is a person who has a family himself, who goes to work every day, pays his taxes, raises his family or whatever. And he was just like, I feel like an absolute dope. And this is just a disgrace. And 20 people living it. There's obviously a huge proportion of them are children, leaving that aside. Groups of adults living in a house, sitting around talking about how wonderful life was because they got up at 12:30 and drink coffee. And that's nothing to do with the ethnicity, John, because if I was reading that of an Irish person who'd grown up here, or as we just discussed, an Irish person who claims to be an artist who's getting money to do sweet FA, I'd be just as equally pissed off about them. And just the kind of welfare state where people are getting away with sitting around, regardless of obviously what ultimately happened, but just, we're not talking about Joseph Puska himself. We're talking about an entire group of adults sitting around drinking coffee and chatting. I think people are right to be annoyed, and I think the government are running out of road on people's patience for this kind of piss take, frankly.
No, not hope. No, they're not. I don't mean to pour
With the
water, because
public.
obviously what you say is, no, they're not. Not a hope. No, this always happens. I mean, look. Here's the thing. People will get angry about this. They'll get angry about the fact that, people were sitting around in the house, doing 20 of them, living off the taxpayer, doing fuck all, drawing their benefits and going to the casino to spend it and gambling, and then making, and, the women seem to, I presume, like what struck with me is the lads getting up at 12:30 in the day, the women there with multiple kids each presumably get up in the morning to work on the kids. Like, just 3 Whether they were guilty or not guilty, it turns out they were guilty. 3 useless lads. You good for nothing people sitting around the house, scratching their arses, drawing the dough, right? People get really pissed off at that. And then they kind of imagine that this is a kind of unique situation, that it's a once-off or whatever, but it's not. This kind of thing is far more common in Irish society than anyone wants to admit. And as you rightly say, it is not connected to any one ethnicity. It's not even connected to any 5 or 6 ethnicities. I mean, arguably there are 1 or 2 ethnicities of migrants who are less prone to it than others. Because I think there are definitely cases of this with Irish families. Absolutely are.
Of course there is.
There are people in this country who've been on the long-term unemployment for 20 years without any sign of any disability. I mean, you talk to politicians, they'll tell you about them. And the public doesn't will move on from this. They'll get angry for a few weeks, they'll move on. The politicians know they'll move on. All it requires a bit of tut-tutting and a shaking of the head, and that's shocking the way the system is being abused, but it will continue because it is continuing at the moment. And I think we shouldn't delude ourselves at the idea that the public are running out of patience with this. The Irish public has never, in the 103-year history of this state, run out of patience with public administrative incompetence. Not going to do it now.
But do you not think that the profile of society is changing such that, like, Irish people or Irish society, I should say, is, as a pinch gets felt and the population grows and people enter into Ireland who aren't Irish, that the bill gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and people just eventually are going to get pissed off? Like John, you can't do anything about a person who is Irish, who's grown up here, who's 3rd generation of a family who have never worked. But I don't think that Irish society views that the same as somebody who's first generation.
Back up the door. What do you mean we can't do anything about them?
Well,
I mean,
they're Irish.
If they lived in the United States, for example, they would not be getting the dole anymore. Just be cut off. That'd be it. Be like, you're perfectly fit, you can get a job, you've leached off the state for long enough, go and get a job. What do you mean we can't do anything about them? We can't do anything about Irish people? Of course we can. We don't want to. People don't want to. People would think that was cruel and mean and heartless and anti-poor. So let's back up the truck from this idea that we can't do anything about them. I think you're making slightly different points.
The point that I'm trying to make, John, is that what Irish people are getting angry about is this was a crime that sparked fury amongst the Irish public. It was one of the worst crimes in my adult memory against a young person who was murdered, a girl who goes out for a run and is murdered for absolutely no reason. Not that there is a reason to murder someone, but you know what I mean? It was one of the more senseless crimes of the last 10 years. Would you agree? And for the Irish society to find out that the background to that was a bunch of fat arses sitting around on their holes, getting up at 12:30 in the day and bleeding the state for whatever money they could possibly get. I think that aggravates people a lot. A lot.
Yeah, of course it does.
So that's what I'm talking about. So what I'm talking about is the Irish families the Irish person who's lived here forever, whose father and grandfather, whatever, never worked, and who sits around in their hole. There's less we could do about that. But the Irish society, the Irish government has been, like Roderick O'Gorman, inviting people to come here, advertising our welfare state. That's a different thing. Advertising that to come here, that there'll be this, there'll be that, or whatever. The generosity of our welfare state to people who've arrived is a different issue.
Yeah, and just to say here on this, I mean, because there's a couple of things I want to respond to there, because I have something I want to get off my chest in a minute. But just to say, the Puskas are obviously EU citizens. People say there's freedom of movement in the European Union, but that is subject to the ability to support yourself. So if you move to another EU state, including to Ireland, freedom of movement is conditional on the ability to support and sustain yourself in the state to which you move. You're not allowed to move and just claim welfare. The fact that people move and claim welfare is a purely decision of the Irish government, not the European Union.
I absolutely love Greece. Love it. Love it. Been going to Greece my whole life. Really, since I'm about 2. I spend at least a month of the year in Greece, right? What would happen if I moved to Greece tomorrow and I don't work? What do I get? Do I get a house?
I don't know. Can I come visit if you do?
Yeah, exactly. I guarantee I don't. So yes, of course, there's freedom of movement, but it's not the same thing. And we seem to be quite generous. I don't think that I would be able to survive getting up at 12:30 and never working and living in a house, be given a house in Greece. People can correct me in the comments if they want. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Next,
but can I get my thing
next week to when she's moved? Tune in next week to when she's moved to Greece.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, go on, get it off your
chest.
For
the Athens Corporal.
Yeah.
What I wanted to get off my chest was what you were saying about the Irish people being really annoyed. And I'll be cautious because I'll be accused of inciting stuff here. And I really don't mean to incite anything. I'm more wondering at the absence. Say people are really angry about the situation here. Well, I haven't heard that reflected in the political arena. I haven't seen any of the great and the good come out and say, this is an absolutely disgraceful state of affairs.
But they never will.
But I'm talking about opposition leaders as well as.
We talk all the time about the disparity between what our political leaders talk about and what's actually on the ground. I'm talking about people that surprise me, texting me, absolutely fuming about this. Obviously, I don't expect I'm going to see that reflected in any kind of major news outlet in this country, but they've been ignoring what people are actually talking about for about 10 years.
I know, but we do still live in a democracy. I mean, these political parties are all elected. They all got votes, including some of them from the people texting you. I don't know who they are, but I'm fairly confident that some of them got votes from people texting you. I mean, Michael McDowell, who I've, by the way, immense time for Senator McDowell, but, he got elected by the graduates of NUI Ireland. He's exactly the kind of person who could say this is a load of nonsense. Has he said anything? No. Sinn Féin, the leading opposition party in the state, like they talk about how they want a society that's more equal and fair, and but that has to include cracking down on people taking the piss out of welfare rates. Easy layup. Did they say anything about it? No, they didn't. I mean, so you say that there's popular anger out there about it, and I'm telling you that it'll be forgotten in 6 weeks and people will move on. 6 weeks, 6 hours, and people will move on because there is nobody in the state who is willing to speak up on it. And until that changes, the situation is going to persist. That's the reality. I don't know if that's getting something off my chest or just being a pessimist, because I wrote a piece this week, Sarah, about how the presidential election, I think, is really an important opportunity for somebody if they want to grasp the nettle and make a pitch to the public that things need to change in this society. Then that election is probably the only chance of doing it, because you can get a national platform without having to build a national party. But yeah, I don't see it changing anytime soon.
Well, I mean, look, we're back to the same old thing, which is that I'm more positive than you.
You are. Well, it just might be the weather's very, very, very hot down here in Tipperary, and I still haven't gotten a fan for this room, so I apologize for the intermittent brow mopping you're seeing on YouTube. But in any case, look, it is what it is. I want to turn to the other end of society at the moment, moving from people who don't do any work to somebody who can't stop working. What did you make of Paul Reid's new job as head of the new Planning Commission, having previously served as head of the HSE and all these other things? I mean, what is it about this guy to keep giving him jobs?
I know, and also how deeply, I think, deeply cynical it is to pay him 50 grand a year for this new job, which is almost like saying in advance, we don't want to hear your cribbing in a year when he's not achieved anything, that we're paying him too much. So we're just going to offset that from the get-go by giving him 50 grand a year, so you don't get to bitch about his salary later when nothing happens or nothing changes. Oh God, Ireland. If you're part of the group, I mean, I've said on this podcast loads of times, I think some of those large capital projects, we don't have the expertise. So those big, huge budgets, we should get somebody in from another country, pay them a massive salary, make training in 2 or 3 people to their level, part of their contract, and give them a 2-year contract or whatever. But we're never going to do that. And we just keep recycling the same people over and over again because we can't learn.
Yeah, I think there's more to it than that. I mean, I wrote a piece on this week, so I had time to. I was thinking about this more than you obviously were, because you have your real job, helping people who are being wrongly prosecuted and prosecuting people who should be prosecuted and all those things that you do. It's a real proper job helping society, whereas my job is sit around all week and think about these things and write things about them. And so I was thinking about this, and I came to the conclusion that Paul Reid keeps getting these jobs not because of what he does, but because of what he doesn't do. in that his central qualification, this is my theory now, is that he's obviously had a good few jobs, so you can't say he's inexperienced or incapable of doing the job. He's never had
Yeah.
a massive disaster in any of the jobs he's done. I mean, you could argue about the HSE, but nobody lost an election because of the HSE when he was head of the HSE. He gets these jobs, though, precisely.
He was head of the HSE when I was in Beaumont for a hellish couple of days, and I would say that was a disaster, but go on anyway.
But it's no more of a disaster than people have on a regular basis with the hospital. But he wasn't in the HSE in Drogheda when somebody I know was lying on trolley for 3 days. So that wasn't out of the ordinary disaster. Anyway, my theory is Paul Reid gets these jobs not because of what he does, but because of what he doesn't do. He is never going to rock the boat. He is never going to make a minister regret appointing him. He is never going to say, do you know what I have? A bright new idea to radically overhaul the way this state works. He is never going to say, do you know what we could do here? We could really improve the way the HSE or the planning authority or whatever works by reducing the staff headcount and making things more efficient, or by moving a lot of this stuff online, or by bringing in, bringing in, an AI tool that will dramatically speed up the efficiency. He's never going to do any of those things. He's never going to propose a reform or do anything that might threaten anyone's job or make anyone else in the organization uncomfortable, ever. He's never going to reform anything. And therefore, if you are a civil servant and you are the state, and the main underpinning value of this state is never doing anything differently and never making life uncomfortable for the people who run the state, he is the ideal appointment. He's never going to do anything. That's my theory with Paul Reid. And if he finds it defamatory, he can sue me, but I don't think it's defamatory. It's just my theory of why he keeps getting these jobs, because I see nothing in his record that would suggest that you'd be appointing him if you were setting up some kind of startup company and wanted to really grow it really fast and wanted to be innovative. You wouldn't be appointing Paul Reid. What do you make of my theory?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a bad theory at all. I don't think many people who work in high-level civil service jobs like that are capable of translating their skill set over to the private sector. That to me is the problem. Like that kind of like fast-paced private sector, do the job, have consequences, be performance appraised kind of style of working doesn't exist in the civil service. And as you say, like, be quiet, don't rock the boat, don't introduce anything new or scary for ministers, and just never ever whatever you do, make the minister look like he might not know what he's doing, and that's the job brief, and that as long as you do that, you'll be fine. It doesn't exist in the private sector.
Yeah, and the big difference as well is to protect everyone else's job, right? So in the private sector, I'm not as sold on Elon Musk's genius as everybody else. By the way, I'm not, or some people are, not everybody else. But like the example of Elon Musk takes over Twitter, now X, and the first thing he did is sack 80% of the staff. And okay, there's the occasional outage. I wouldn't say everything's been entirely smooth sailing. I'm not convinced that Elon Musk has definitely made X/Twitter a better or more pleasant place to be. Yeah. But you wouldn't miss the 80% of the staff he sacked. And I think you could quite comfortably go into the HSE and sack, okay, let's not say 80%, but I think you could get rid of 40% of the people working in the HSE and see no meaningful damage to people in Drogheda Hospital on trolleys. But no one's ever going to do that, because the public sector is about protecting the public sector. And I'm not saying there aren't really good people in the public sector. Of course there are. My wife is in the public sector. Lots of excellent public servants. But the management culture, I think, is rotten.
Yeah, and it has been for years. And the budget just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
What did you make of the, did you see the figures in the Sunday Business Post this week that Irish government spending has doubled in 10 years from 2015 to 2025? Went from 55 billion to 110 billion, according to projections this year. Do you feel twice better off? Do you feel that the country's twice as good as it was in 2015?
Now, do you know what I actually felt? All jokes aside, like, not to be dramatic, but you and I have discussed before, because we're both 40 in our very early 40s, that we were adults at the time of the last crash and saw the direct consequences and saw the suffering that some people really went through. And so I think when I saw that, a little chill just went down my spine of like, what could be coming here? If there was a pinch, if there's a change or whatever, and that spending has to be rapidly reined in a dramatic fashion, I think that's scary.
Did you see Simon Harris's quote on this?
No.
Like I again, I wrote a piece on this earlier on in the week, because the thing is I write so many pieces over the course of the week that I forget some of them. But it was about his quote. His quote was, and forgive me, I might be paraphrasing, but you can see it in my piece if you just Google Gript Simon Harris quote. It was words to the effect of, the Irish economy is in really good shape, albeit with dark clouds on the horizon. And I just thought to myself, like, that is like the captain of the Titanic saying, yeah, we're going well now, just with icebergs ahead. Or
Yeah.
somebody driving a car
Or you
right
go
at the wall kind of going,
no,
yeah.
you go to your GP for a health check because you're just really healthy with dark clouds on the horizon. What the hell does that mean? Like,
It's bizarre. I mean,
I
Simon,
don't.
if you're listening, like, I just,
yeah,
like,
it's
it
a
was,
stupid thing to say, but fine, whatever.
it's one of those ones.
Sometimes.
I'm telling you, Simon, if you are listening, that one is going to be hung around your neck if there's a recession. Just tell me, buddy. It'll be hung around your neck. That one's going to go in the Hall of Fame. The economy's doing well, but with dark clouds on the horizon. But what are you doing to mitigate the dark clouds? You're certainly not slowing down with spending. Spending is full steam ahead. So it's like if you were Captain Smith of the Titanic and you saw the iceberg and you said, keep sailing. That's what I'm taking from it. I mean, obviously there's all the platitudes, right? All the kind of like, we will take the appropriate measures to ensure the stability of the economy. Well, no, you're just going to keep spending. That's pretty much what you said. So,
and no one's going to stop you until eventually you get stopped, and then you'll go, oh my God, this is entirely unforeseeable.
All right. You want to talk about the grooming gangs in the UK?
Yeah. So there's been a report, a fast report, they call it, released by Baroness Casey in the UK, and she's published a rapid review into the grooming pages and released this 200-page report. And I just think that some of the observations that she's made so far are really interesting. Obviously, these are grooming gangs in the UK, not Ireland, but like just the kind of it's not just for me the failings, right? It's because failings can happen and things can get missed, but it's the mindset behind the failings, and the institutional failures that failed these girls, and the fear of like calling of calling things as they are because of what they might look like. So one of the things she talks about is data suppression. She says, we found that the ethnicity of perpetrators is shied away from and is still not recorded for 2/3 of perpetrators. So we're unable to provide any accurate assessment from the nationally collected data. Now, that was deliberate, surely. Do you know what I mean? We found too many examples of child sexual exploitation criminal cases being dropped or downgraded from rape to lesser charges where a 13 or to 15-year-old had been in love with or had consented to sex with the perpetrator. Wouldn't happen in any other scenario. I guarantee it. So like some kind of a random teacher, in London with a child who's 13 to 15 and the child says they're in love with him, that person would be prosecuted, but not in this kind of situation. Another thing that she said,
statutory rape, right?
Yeah, of course it is.
What that means is that it's by statute.
But exactly. And then there was things like there's cases of incidents of modern sex slavery. Child was advertised on an adult sex work website, and more than 25 men were thought to have visited her over 4 days. Organized crime group involvement suspected. Like, I mean, it's so damning, right? I'm not even going to continue. People can look it up. It's actually only 197 pages long. It's not that, like, you can read, the overall. But the overall picture that's painted is that girls were absolutely failed by the state. There was just countless incidents of things being reported and ignored. The ethnicity seems to be the main preoccupation of the police, of both of the victims, of ignoring the ethnicity of both victims and perpetrators because they were concerned about what that might look like in the bigger picture. And I mean, I just think it's like, I go back to this all the time. I feel like sometimes I repeat myself too much, but the thing that really like hurts my soul is that we had this supposed movement towards believing women and girls and feminism and all of this, and it comes back time and time again. We're just presented with evidence that if you're not the right kind of girl or you're not the right kind of victim, you just don't matter as much. And this report and the observations in this report absolutely reinforce that. And we were told for a long time, and people in the UK who stood up against this, who had serious damage and consequences to their lives, who were screaming and jumping up and down about this for a long time, are completely vindicated by this initial report. Will it go anywhere? I don't know, but it's vindication for sure.
But for me, you see, I understand completely why there was an instinct in parts of the British media to play down the idea that these were organized Muslim Pakistani grooming gangs. I understand that instinct. No. Can I finish the point? Because I think there's a scarier story here. I'm not saying I forgive it. I'm not saying they made the right decision. I'm saying I understand the instinct on a human level. They thought they didn't want to stoke racial tensions, right? They wanted to believe with the best intentions that every society has a few bad apples in it, and we don't want people coming out and saying all Pakistanis are rapists or whatever. I understand that instinct. But the problem is, for me, the terrifying thing about the grooming gang scandal is how the institutions of society reacted to it. I know Charlie Peters of GB News a very little bit. Met him a couple of times. Admired his work, listened to a lot of the stuff that he has done on the grooming gang scandal. And for me, what is worse than the rapes by the rapists is the active complicity of parts of the British state. So, for example, there was a case where the police in a particular northern British town arrived at a house late at night, and they found two 13-year-old girls in a state of advanced undress and intoxication with 6 adult men. And do you know what they did? They arrested the 2 young girls for being drunk and disorderly and didn't do a thing to the men. There was the case of the social worker who dropped a 13-year-old girl back to the home of her boyfriend / pimp. There have been multiple cases where the police, were either actively involved or actively turned or actively ignored people who went and made complaints to them. And as you say, multiple cases where they basically said that the law didn't apply. So if you had a case of a 13-year-old girl or 14-year-old girl is having sex with a man in his 40s and had been groomed to the extent that she said, he's my boyfriend, I love him, the police go, oh, so she consented, it's fine. Even though the law of the land says statutory rape is sex with a person under 16. Doesn't matter if they consent. The whole point of the law is they can't consent, right? That's the law. They cannot consent. So for me, the story is this is the last thing I'll say. And perhaps this will change because we've got a load of people from these grooming gangs who are in prison. They've been rounded up. A lot of these prosecutions, by the way, this is not a new thing. A lot of these cases go back to the early 2000s. Some of the prosecutions happened in 2010, 2012. The point is, there is not one person in the British establishment. And by that, I do not mean just Whitehall and the 10 Downing Street. I mean the social workers, the Department of Children, the police. Not one person has resigned or been held accountable for the way the state failed these girls. It's one thing. Rapists rape kids. Kid rapists rape kids. That's what they do. The point of the state is to prevent that from happening. What did the British state not do? Why didn't it do it? And why has nobody been held to account? That's the point, I think. No?
No, of course it is. Of course it is. And the failure of those girls, and the state failed these girls, allowed this to continue happening, and is still not having honest conversations about it.
Yeah, and the other conversation it's not having is that when you start asking why did the state fail, you've got to start looking at, and this is where the really uncomfortable conversation has to be had, I think. Because the uncomfortable conversation isn't were there gangs of mainly Asian men grooming and raping mainly white children. There were. That's a statement of fact. Where the real controversy, I think, arises is in the why were they allowed to get away with it as much as they did. And I think you've got to look at towns in England where, these communities have taken over their own governance. We've got Sharia courts where you've got a lot of British, Asian, Pakistani councillors on the local council, where you've got a lot of people with those kind of connections in the local police force. And the extent to which, at least in some cases, this was a community organised effort to protect the perpetrators. That's the really difficult conversation that nobody, I think, is yet willing to have.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that in an Irish context, a country, a society, a media that is unwilling to have hard conversations ultimately falls into these kind of horrific, like pretending that there isn't problems with certain things and acting as if that, or avoiding the kind of hard conversations that we're talking about, is not without consequence. The problem is that the victims of that kind of thing end up being, I think, women and girls.
I just want to read a story from the Irish Times from this week on this topic. A 12-year-old child who went missing from state care in 2023 is thought to be safe in the United Kingdom, according to Tusla. In a statement to the Irish Times, the agency said that the child, whose whereabouts was unclear on Thursday night, had absconded from Tusla's care soon after arriving into Ireland in March 2023, having indicated a plan to join a family in the United Kingdom. Tusla, the Child and Family Agency, later contacted a relative of the child in the UK who, quote, indicated the child was safe, although no social worker spoke to the child directly.
Yeah.
Since
Wasn't
January
there something recently in the last couple of years about people indicating that a child was okay and then it turning out that they were actually dead?
Yes, that I think you're talking about the Karen Durnan case in Dundalk.
Indicated.
Yes. Since January 2023 up to the 11th of June, 30 children. This is in the last 2 years to the 11th of June. Since January 23 up to the 11th of June, 30 children who have gone missing from Tusla's care remain unaccounted for. In that time, 123 children have gone missing from Tusla's care. Of these, 65, that's fewer than half, it's just over half, have been found or accounted for. 28 have since turned 18 and their files closed. Files closed, by the way. They turned 18, so it's not our problem anymore.
Oh, God.
With 30 children still missing. I mean, what can you say about that? I mean, this is another one. Do you remember we were talking earlier on in the podcast, and I was saying, why aren't people angry about it? Why aren't people angry about this? I'll tell you one thing. Can you imagine, what the Irish Labour Party will be saying if the story was that a 12-year-old girl had gone missing from the care of the Catholic Church? They didn't know where she was, and they'd lost 30, by the way, over the last year, and they'd just gone missing. Can you imagine? I mean, that would be correct. It is a national scandal. I sometimes feel like if I sound a bit jaded this week, it's because I kind of sometimes feel like all we do on this podcast is give out, when actually you and I are pretty good humoured people who have fun a lot of the time. But like I also think it's important to mention these things, because I think there are people who listen to us who kind of think they're going mad because they're the only people who notice these things. But no, we notice them. We notice them.
And I definitely noticed from the comments that there's quite a lot of people who do talk about the missing children in Irish, like children missing from state care. Like, I do see the comments, and there is a lot of people who are really concerned about this and who try their very best to bring it up as much as possible within their power, in comments and in different things. And so I don't think it's not on the radar of a lot of people, but
I have obviously this degree of sympathy for Tusla in one respect, in that oftentimes children that find their way into its care are troubled, or come from difficult circumstances and have challenges, and some of them might want to run away. I get that, but the point is, you're a state agency, you're well resourced. They shouldn't be able to run away. And if a child escapes from a facility like that, why isn't there a national alert? Why isn't there a national alert this child is missing and should be returned? If there's a 14-year-old who goes missing in a small town in Clare from her parents' house, there's a national alert. There's a story. The Gardaí will issue an alert to media outlets, and the photograph will be published, and this child is missing, and please return it. And half times in the cases of teenagers, it's they've run off to Belfast with their boyfriends or something. That's what it is half the time. Thank God, that's all it is. But there's still a
Yeah.
national alert. When these kids go missing from Tusla, we find out a couple of years later that there's 30 missing.
Yeah.
What's going on there? And how do we know they aren't being? I mean, this is the thing. How do you know those kids, or at least some portion of them, are not being recruited into really horrific scenarios involving
Well, you
prostitution
don't.
and
I mean, it's like
exploitation?
the principle of and I'm not suggesting this is what's happening, but it's like that principle of, you know, like horrific murders that were happening in America, like serial killers, and nobody noticed because the women that they were killing were vulnerable women who were prostitutes or whatever, and then people didn't notice that they were missing. I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but I'm just saying that there is a lack of definitely less empathy and concern amongst society for people who tend to be a bit more vulnerable. And those you're talking about a girl who goes missing from her family home and then she goes into town with her boyfriend. Yeah, she gets the Amber Alert. But the point is that really vulnerable, you know, 13 and 14-year-old girls might not have a family. So they might be in a home. They might, you know, they don't have that kind of social contract with a family and aunties and uncles and school and blah, 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 blah. So they slip through the cracks. And to your point, we don't know. We hope that they've just run off with a boyfriend or, you know, like left and met some guy and gone to London. That's the best case scenario. The alternatives to that are too horrible to think about.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'll finish because we're almost out of time. But just on this, I spent not my adult life, but kind of growing up, moving into adulthood, sort of into your 20s and your 30s from your teens. And the only thing I heard about this society over and over and over again is that Ireland is changing. Ireland is becoming a better place. Ireland is a warmer country now. We look after people better. We're not cold. We don't send people to the Magdalen laundries. We don't condemn people for having children out of wedlock. We let people get divorced. We're just a better place. And yet here we are in 2025 with the people who brought you that narrative, the people who passed the children's rights referendum, the people who set up TUSLA, have a state agency that has lost 30 children, doesn't know where a 12-year-old child is, and none of these people give a flying fuck or appear to. So, I mean, I'm done with the lectures on Ireland being a compassionate society. It's not a compassionate society. It's the same callous, sweep the problems under the rug and pretend they don't notice society it's always been. And in 20 years or 30 years, when there's a scandal about what happened to the missing children, and some of them ended up being gang raped, or some of them were murdered, or some of them had an absolutely terrible time with drugs or whatever, and the state just didn't come looking for them. Then we'll all say, how could that happen? And our children will tell each other the same bloody lie, which is, well,
Never again.
Wouldn't happen today.
Yeah.
We're a more compassionate society now. That's the national cycle, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. That's so depressing.
You and I are going to a party at the weekend. We're going to a midsummer's party. We won't say where it is, but I'm really looking forward to seeing you in person.
Yay.
And we'll have drinks and chats and be merry and be fun. I'm sure we'll meet one or two listeners at the event we're going to. So that's good. Look on the bright side. And also, the weather is going to be phenomenal over the next week. As you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, I've been a little bit warm. It's the 26 degrees where I am. I think it's going to be 30 by the weekend, which is too hot. But some people really like the heat, so that's good news.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Okay, look, we will leave it there. I've been John. She's been Sarah. This has been The Week That Really Was. Thank you very much for all of you who listen to us every week. We are happy to keep you company for an hour, and we look forward to seeing you in a week's time. Take care.